So thank you all for joining so far. I believe you'll find it extremely useful and insightful as we explore the email ecosystem within healthcare and some of the vulnerabilities, some of the risks and threats associated to that. So to start, I will give a brief introduction to myself, to CSTEM, and Jamie Davis from Egress will then overview how we can reduce that number one threat organizations face, which is insider risk. So my name is Paul Doyle. It's my responsibility here at CSTEM to ensure we maximize your investments in technology, avoiding tech clash and fitting you with the most appropriate solutions to fit your short-term needs, which we like to describe as your interim operating model, as well as your long-term goals, which we identify as your target operating model. So STEM stands for Systems Plus Techniques equals Effective Management. So we do not conflict with strategic goals and outcomes which have already been set out. We simply take a consultative approach to help you confidently qualify what is needed to implement them. So we diagnose before we prescribe. We are incredibly passionate about ensuring all technologies and services we work with are focused and tailored to your business outcomes, with Egress being a value partner of ours. We also work very hard to avoid shelfware, a term we use to explain where technology is deployed at a time of need, but the business environment changes around it, yet the technology remains stagnant in its setup and ceases to deliver on the intended ongoing value, therefore making it redundant. So our goal is that after today's session, you will have a clearer understanding of who CSTEM are, what we do, why we do it, and also why organizations choose to partner with CSTEM and use us as a trusted supplier. Jamie will then explain why Egress is such a powerful tool in the healthcare sector before we leave some time at the end for a question and answer. The chat boxes will be open throughout, so please fire any messages, any comments, any questions in there, and we'll get to answer those at the end of the webinar. So at CSTEM, why is our vision and mission so important? It's because we understand that relationships and user experience directly impact productivity, value, adoption of digital services, and ultimately business outcomes. And this is across our entire network from you, our customers, to Jamie and our partners like Egress. For many years, we've seen and heard of shortcomings in adoption. So we work very hard to differentiate for you so you get maximum value and ROI from the technology you put in place and from working with us. As you will see later on, we have purpose-built processes aligned to our vision and relationships. But where do we stand at the moment? All businesses are engaged in digital strategies. Some organizations are more mature than others, and some are still at the start of their journey, whether that be utilizing cloud technology or using computerized devices to assist with operations, as an example. Whatever stage of the journey you are at, the primary challenge is still the same: modernizing your architecture without compromising your risk appetite in detection, compliance, and response that can significantly hinder the delivery of strategic goals. I will try not to mention COVID-19 too much. However, last year, the level of acceptable risk dramatically increased as we were all firefighting. We were very much trying to enable a strategy which allowed business continuity and business to carry on as close to normal as possible. This year, on the other hand, organizations and boards are now aware of that risk and the threat it poses, and are trying to identify ways in which they can mitigate against it. So what does that look like when communicating with each other? Information sharing has become increasingly difficult to secure with siloed systems which don't necessarily communicate with each other, combined with the extraordinary rise in data. And this is across all care services, not just the NHS. Often you'll be trying to monitor hundreds of systems, applications, which is just incredibly difficult to manage and probably not possible. Coupled with the addition of unsanctioned third-party tools such as WhatsApp or Dropbox, it can leave you and the IT teams incredibly vulnerable. Most of your organizations will want to achieve cyber essentials and must adhere and complete frameworks like the DSPT or DCB 1596 accreditation, but you need the necessary protocols in place. So Jamie will go into a lot more depth a little later on. However, you need to reduce the threat to critical information. You need to empower your employees to become cybersecurity advocates who can identify future breaches. We all know and understand that employees are the most vulnerable and susceptible to attacks. However, it also provides you with a fantastic opportunity to make them the first line of your defense. How great would it be if you could provide instant advice and guidance to your employees when abnormal behavior is identified to help reduce accidental or even intentional data loss, or to determine the actual risk of a data breach to ensure the correct security and control is always applied. You need to be able to provide comprehensive reports, analysis, insights on email communications to governing bodies like the ICO should data breaches occur, which is why we will work with you to help achieve that. So our aims at CSTEM are really quite simple, is to help your organization realize and optimize outcomes whilst reducing overheads and avoid compromises in risk. As I mentioned earlier, all of your organizations are on a transformation journey with just strategic milestones set out. By partnering with CSTEM, we immediately help you move to an evidence-based position for your relevant work streams, enabling you with effective data-informed decision-making and planning. As you move forward in your journey, you will then be able to realize your milestones faster whilst optimizing time and resource, a challenge we all know too well. Our customers find that they can free up valuable time and effort, finances, with the returns increasing in size as they scale up their journey and progress with the adoption of our smart services. But how do we achieve that at CSTEM? Well, we understand technology will already be in place for monitoring operations and risk. Our complementary approach means we do not conflict with legacy technology or get in the way of existing planned projects. We simply help organizations bridge the gap between actual and target effectiveness. A perfect example of this is how we work with egress to complement Office 365, something I know most of you will have already adopted. We find most organizations have a need to accelerate development, yet have concerns regarding delays in existing projects and whether they can maximize value from the technology they already have. So we focus on providing the right solution at the right time for you as we map out that project timeline from day one. Our customers often work in phases across our different smart services modules. These are our priorities and our expertise, as they are focused in the key areas which have resulted in this development of smart services toolkits, CrowdSmart and CloudSmart. By having the different modules, it means you can take advantage of the component parts you need to tackle your priority challenges, with each having a role to play in bridging that gap in overall effectiveness. We selected these areas as they all directly impact digital transformation outcomes, as well as being dependent on each other for maximum effectiveness as part of your cyber strategy. So for example, to tackle LAN, WAN and cloud, it's incredibly important to understand application performance and how well key apps are performing and what impact that has on user productivity. To tackle asset detection, it's important to understand mobility and agile working. I know some of you on today's webinar have already engaged with us to address this issue, with successful deployments having taken place. For those of you that find this a hot topic, and a lot of NHS trusts are in the same position as yourselves, we're actually hosting a webinar next Thursday explaining the importance of agentless medical device security. So please get in contact with myself or the team after this webinar if you would like to join and attend that next week. But today, we're of course looking to tackle email security and insider risk with egress. So for that, it's important to understand data management and where sensitive data is held in developing cyber resilience. We have a purpose-built process to support our vision of creating and sustaining those outstanding relationships. We can more easily and confidently match the right technology and services to business needs whilst ensuring sustainable optimized value. So at CSEM, we aim to qualify and evidence the fit aligned to your business needs and outcomes. However, qualifying and evidencing that fit can be two separate things. However, our process helps you achieve both. So this is particularly useful when we're engaging with different stakeholders within different stages of the journey. So that may be speaking to the technical engineers and going through the technical fit through a POV, or right through to procurement and financial sign-off with directors and the board. This methodology works particularly well in communities that share common challenges, with those community members having already trodden down the path and carried out their due diligence, which can be translated to 70–80% commonality across the community. As a result, time to value is accelerated, overheads are reduced, and we believe that this community-driven approach is the best practice for everyone involved. I will now hand over to Jamie, who will explain how egress works to help reduce the level of insider risk within healthcare.
Thank you, Paul. It would very much help if I unmute myself, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I thought that might be the case.
Can you see a screen now?
I can, yes.
That says human-led security insider risk, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Perfect. Well, look, thank you for everyone who's attended this webinar. This is a bit of a homecoming, really. I started my life in sales, working with the NHS, probably shortly after the National Programme for IT was commissioned and the NHS.mail was built. And I'm not going to go into the full ins and outs of kind of the successes and the failures of that programme, but I think it's pretty much well documented. And then shortly after that, it was round about the time when the world, or certainly Department for Health, decided to decentralize the Microsoft Enterprise Agreement. And then, yeah, that was fundamentally it, working very, very closely with the NHS for a number of years to kind of understand the licensing that's needed. Fast forward to where I am, possibly 14 years later, and I'm now, I suppose, to a certain degree, the other side of the coin, kind of working and plugging the gaps with Microsoft. So, and value-added partners like CSTEM. But we use the term a lot, our human layer security. And it's something, it's not just a new buzzword, in my opinion. This is something that I feel really, really passionate about. And even before working at Egress, this is kind of a topic of conversation that I would have, weekly with information security professionals. I was very unpopular at a large cybersecurity conference when I stood up on stage and said, if your doctors are using things like Dropbox to transfer DICOM images, then surely we failed them, because we should be giving them the tools to be successful in their role and not circumvent the technologies that have been put in place because it's easy. So I truly believe that people should be empowered, not punished. And certainly when we look at insider risk, we look at the fact that humans can make mistakes. We should be wrapping tools around the user, not punishing them for making these mistakes. So that's what I mean, or that's what underpins whenever I talk about human layer security. It's around empowering people to make the right decisions. It's about wrapping security around the user, not the perimeter of a data, and giving them the safety net to be to fail, but actually cause no damage to the business whatsoever. It is also, for me, about switching the narrative from users are our weakest link to users are our strongest advocates and strongest assets in the fight against data breaches, cybercrime, etc. So when you hear, or when I think of the insider risk landscape, I think about it along fundamentally three pillars in terms of what egress do and what egress address. The first is people get hacked. And it's a sad reality at the moment that attackers are targeting healthcare organizations. They are targeting the NHS because they understand, and ultimately the payload or the payoff in a lot of these targeted attacks is ransomware or financial gains, because they know that data is the lifeblood of healthcare. And if we've seen quite a lot of instances where the healthcare has paid the ransom. So this is becoming a really, really targeted industry that cyber criminals are looking at, because they know that well, we saw it in Ireland. You know, a lot of patients had to have the hospital appointments cancelled. The most critical patients were in a situation that, you know, no doctor, no consultant, no GP, no managing director of or CEO of the hospital wanted to be in, but they didn't have access to that data. So when I think of the insider risk landscape, the first pillar is people get hacked, and the attacks are getting more sophisticated. They are bypassing perimeter defenses. They are bypassing the capability that's available in secure email gateways and causing problems to healthcare organizations. The second pillar, and we see this day in, day out, is people make mistakes. It's been well documented, the stress, fatigue, emotional turmoil that the, you know, NHS workers and frontline healthcare workers have had to go through the last 18 months. They have worked countless hours and were the absolute heroes of what has been a you know, unprecedented time in the last 18 months. But when you're tired, when you're fatigued, when you're stressed, you make mistakes. When I do these presentations in an actual auditorium, I will stand up and say, you know, how many people have sent an email to the wrong person? And normally 95% of people put their hands up. It is the most reported data security incident on most healthcare organizations' breach logs. I know that from, you know, I'm privileged to be able to speak to a multitude of different healthcare organizations, from private healthcare to pharmaceuticals to NHS trusts to ambulance service. The one commonality, or the one common denominator in this, is actually there is a problem around missharing of information over email. And the third pillar is people break the rules. And I'm not saying that there are people in your organization who are maliciously exfiltrating data for financial gain. I understand that actually the NHS and, you know, generally speaking, healthcare organizations have, you know, by nature, they have a lot of caring employees, but people want to do their job. People have been working from home. People are struggling to do things like set up print drivers on their lockdown corporate machines. So they email themselves, you know, sensitive content to be able to print from their home machines. Therefore, you know, you lose control of that data. So when I think of email inside a risk landscape, I think of these three pillars. People get hacked, people get mistakes, people break the rules. But the thing that is at the absolute center, the center of all of this, is that word people. This is not just a technology problem. This is not just a build a secure email gateway, force a user to encrypt anything containing PII, and you're going to solve this problem. This is a cultural problem, as well as a technology problem, as well as a data protection problem, as well as an information security problem. So the insider risk landscape, and when I say human layer security, is to look at trying to break down some of these problems. I've touched on this, but there is a real risk for healthcare. It is one of the biggest targets. Our threat intelligence team are looking at data kind of daily about new attacks, new threats, and healthcare is the biggest target for phishing attacks. It is no longer, I don't know, the Prince of Nigeria who's stuck on Mars who wants to, you know, give you your bank details and, oh, give me your bank details and I'll transfer you £1 million when I'm back in Nigeria. That doesn't, them attacks aren't getting through, and the world has wised up to it. We run an exercise on, you know, a couple of our savvy customers with their permission on, would you report this as a phish or a not a phish, with some of the most sophisticated attacks that our technology is detecting, by the way, but is getting through perimeter defenses. And the average was 50%. So if CISOs and people who are in security, who are living this stuff day in, day out, are looking at something and going, no, that's legitimate, and it's actually a phishing attempt that's been engineered by an attacker, then how can we trust users and empower them to spot these types of risks? You know, I've spoken about this before. Healthcare workers are vulnerable to making mistakes. You know, it happens day in, day out in every single facet of life. If you're tired and you're driving, statistically, there's more chances of you having an accident. If you're tired or fatigued or stressed, statistically, there's more chance of you saying something that was out of term or snapping back at a loved one or whatever it may be. And there's a lot of interesting analysis in terms of the cost of a data breach for healthcare organizations. Now, I'm not just looking at, the fine here. I'm looking at the remediation, the fallout, the reporting, any fine. And according to IBM, the average cost of a data breach for a healthcare organization is £5.7 million. That is a staggering amount. So the impact can be high. What is the risk? Because that's when we look at, I suppose, when we look at risk, we have to look at likelihoods versus impact. Well, according to the ICO, data breach incidents 2020, and to be fair, this trend has actually continued through into 2021 as well. The two most highest reported incidents reported to the UK ICO, misdirected email by far, number 2, phishing. This is a problem for all businesses, but healthcare was ranked in the top 5 as well. And again, it goes back to the point, it's a cultural problem, it's a people problem, it's a psychological problem. It's a, when we create an email, people are more bothered about the content that's been shared and whether you've got, sentences in the right line, rather than whether it's going to the right person. We enter something into the 2 field, and then we have a psychological scotoma. It's like a blind spot. We don't see it anymore. So that causes so many problems. So there is a real challenge here, people. And I've spoken about our mission, what human-led security means to me. But CSTEM eloquently put about their mission and, trying to make things easier for the healthcare industry. We want to try and eliminate insider risk because it's a complex cybersecurity challenge every organization faces. So what is the approach to that? Well, I'm sure many people know egress on this webinar because we do things like, run the NHS mail platform. If you are ever needing to transfer data to about a patient in your care who is part of the criminal justice system, you'll be aware of our work with the Criminal Justice Secure Mail. So as a business, we've been around for a number of years solving really complex data transfer issues. But actually, as we've kind of evolved as a business and grown, there's one thing being able to provide a mechanism to be able to transfer that data. It's safely. It's is it going to the right person? And actually, what external people want access to that data who potentially are malicious threat actors? So our approach to tackling these human-activated threats, because these aren't technical challenges, these are human challenges, is to use the appropriate machine learning coupled with the appropriate rules, coupled with sophisticated linguistic and contextual analysis to understand the intent of an inbound email or an outbound email and try and stop a user from making a silly mistake. Simply put, we need to be moving the security away from the perimeter and building it around the user. If you keep all threats at bay and a threat then originates in front of the user and they think the world is rosy, they're going to be less inclined to report it. They're probably going to fall for it. I often use this analogy, and if you've ever seen me speak on a webinar, I speak about this, in more depth. I use the analogy of tennis. If I want to get good at tennis, I do not sit down in a tennis awareness training once a quarter or once every 12 months, and then I go out and I am ready to play at Wimbledon. That just doesn't happen in normal life. If I want to get good at tennis, I'm out on the court practicing day in, day out, working, striving to be better. And we need to be taking that mindset to our users, to our employees, to our humans who can be our biggest advocate here. So build security around a user to inform, assist, and prevent a breach of security. So I just want to touch a little bit about our intelligent email security platform because many people will have interacted with it on this webinar, even if they're not aware of it. because of the work that we do with NHS Digital and the NHS Mail platform. But actually, we have to look at inbound and outbound risks on email as a single risk, because inbound goes into outbound. I may be an attacker who's gone online and seen that actually somebody at an NHS trust has had their credentials phished, and I can probably buy them credentials for about $5 on the black market. I can then go, okay, well, what does that person do? That person's in finance, cool. So I'm going to use legitimate but compromised credentials to ask the CFO to change my salary details because I want to have financial gain out of the output of that email. The fact that that's an outbound threat that's turning into an inbound threat turning into an outbound threat means that we have to look at these as a single, I suppose, a single challenge. So on the inbound threat protection front, we stop some of the most sophisticated cyber attacks that bypass things like Microsoft Defender. We've actually done some stats. We deployed our technology at a global insurance business, about 13,500 users, who also licensed Microsoft Defender in about 24 hours, I hasten to add. And we found some really interesting stats about how many we're actually getting through daily the Microsoft Defender capabilities. So we are looking at the most sophisticated inbound threats that get through the traditional perimeter-based security defenses. On the outbound, we're looking at human error and understanding human behavior and understanding when that consultant shares that data, who do they normally share it with? How do they normally share it? Who else is involved in that email thread? And work to detect any anomalies on that behavior and reduce the amount of human error and, quite frankly, as a lot of DPOs put it, avoidable errors that result in costly data breaches. And then the third pillar is to protect information with the appropriate level of protection. I'm really sorry, I'm in the office today, and if somebody leaves the front door open, security at its finest, it buzzes, but one of my colleagues has just got that. So yeah, but to protect the information with the appropriate level of protection, it is not, in my opinion, acceptable to treat all data the same and all use cases the same. If I'm transferring a large volume of medical records for a legitimate business reason versus communicating an appointment with a patient, the threat and the risk attributed to that data transfer is completely different. So we blend security with appropriate level of protection. Whether that's we're confident it's going to the right person, we're confident that that recipient supports TLS or isn't going to be capable of, potentially opening a full encrypted email, then maybe we just use TLS to deliver that. Maybe we try and replicate TLS and deliver this message level encryption, but have a frictionless experience to be able to access that data. So actually, the intelligent email security platform looks at inbound and outbound risks. I want to touch a little bit on the NHS Digital partnership as well. And one of the questions actually was, a big factor is communicating across the care network. How does this integrate with NHS Mail? We have a partnership with NHSD to deliver our services to NHS Digital, primarily focused around the Protect module. So a couple of years ago, we took over the encryption overlay to NHSD. It was a fascinating kind of transition, because as more and more organizations started kind of getting wind that we were providing a mechanism not only to encrypt emails, but to be able to securely transfer large files, the growth of that usage grew, far beyond what the team at NHSD predicted, because it actually proved that, our internal users, our internal employees actually wanted to use security technology that just didn't add friction or barriers, but actually allowed you guys as security professionals to be able to be safe in the knowledge that, the data had the most appropriate level of protection. So egress now power the NHS Mail encryption platform. There's another question that I'll come to at the end. But I think actually looking from a delegate list, a lot of the delegation was around the NHS, and there's a number of use cases where organizations have kind of utilized our technology as an overlay to NHS Mail or Office 365. But this was a healthcare organization that had both a corporate email account and an NHS Mail email account. They knew they had a problem with misdirected emails, but they just could not quantify that risk. They knew they were a high target of phishing attempts because they were forever telling people to disconnect the network to stop the perforation of ransomware and social engineering and credential hijacking. And they implemented egress to solve some of these problems. One of the things that was kind of fascinating about this story, though, was actually they wanted to do a proof of value to understand whether we detect things over and above what Microsoft, and I'm going to touch on the M365 stuff as well, but over and above what Microsoft wouldn't detect. But they also wanted to quantify that risk and say, okay, we know people share content with the wrong person. How many times has it happened? Well, what has it been reported? Which obviously they can look at the incident log. Is there scenarios where users are trying to use the Outlook recall button and then thinking, oh, I've done my job, I don't need to report it to the DPO? We actually identified that it was probably happening about 11 times more than what was in their data incident log, which ultimately resulted in them implementing egress and mitigating this risk. So I just want to talk a little bit, and I'm not going to kind of demo any technology today, but I do want to talk a little bit about this kind of journey around a mail coming in and a mail going out, and how we are integrating with, Office 365, how we are overlaying to Office 365, how we are overlaying to some of the components of the NHS Mail platform to deliver more value than an organization typically gets from Office 365. So hopefully the attendee who asked the question, anonymous attendee, about 365, I'm about to answer it now. On the inbound, we are not looking for known good, known bad. We are not looking for, is this on a massive, allow list or block list that Microsoft maintain to say, we've seen this before, it's bad, we haven't seen this before, it's good. We are looking at the building blocks of deception. Any form of deception has the same building blocks, and we overlay linguistic analysis and all the kind of standard stuff that you'd expect from a perimeter-based security solution like SPF records, for how long that domain's been in the wild and registered for, all of them, to calculate a risk score, then feed that back to a user, in which a user will then get a banner, which one, one of the most appropriate ones here, and they can then interact with that banner and see in language that is easy to understand why we think it's a phish, why it should be reported, why it should be deleted, or we can automate that process for them as well. But actually in this scenario, there's no payload. It's not coming from a trusted domain. It's not coming from an untrusted domain. It's coming from a compromised set of credentials within my healthcare organization's supply chain. And these breeze past traditional solutions that are looking for known good, known bad, links that go to malware, attachments that contain executables. The world is moving on from that. This is why ransomware is becoming such a problem, because phishing attempts are becoming more sophisticated and they're getting through. The next part to this journey is, once we're kind of detecting these inbound threats, how can we empower that user, again in language that they can understand, to make the right decision with outbound threats? So in this scenario here, we are looking at a number of data points to try and understand, is this normal behavior? I don't know if you can see this in the demo environment in this screen, but there's a risk up here. We flag to the user, we're prompting them. We've got the sidebar that they can come out, that we can pull out, and we're feeding back to them if they're about to make a mistake. And this is where, I mentioned at the top end of the call about using the appropriate level of machine learning. This is where social graphing is really good, really good tool to be able to detect some of this kind of thing. I normally communicate patient ID 1234 with Jamie at egress.com. Why are you now trying to send it to Jamie at gmail.com? And we can present back and query the users. On top of that, we apply the appropriate level of protection based on the recipient domain, based on the content in the data, based on the risk of data loss. And then we apply the appropriate level of protection, whether that is full rights management, whether that is a recipient authenticates in with their NHS ID, whether it's they by having access to that email, they have access to the data and the encryption keys, but it's the appropriate level of protection. So the question that was asked, Office 365, what's the main difference is Office 365 doesn't account for context at all across email. It doesn't understand that patient ID 1234 is meant for Jamie Davies. It doesn't understand that the finance person who can send credit card information because it's part of their job, they need to do so, are about to send it to the wrong person, the wrong Jamie. It doesn't understand the context of an email, whether the intent of the email is malicious or benign. So that is the major answer to this question without going through it in loads of details and talk about how all the technology works. The simple answer is context. Our technology understands context, and when you understand context, you can prevent the number one cause and number two cause of data breaches that occur in an organization. So back to my original point, we need to be making people the greatest first line of defense. We cannot be penalizing them for making mistakes when the systems that we're putting in place are literally allowing them to make that mistakes left, right, and center. I will argue with, and my background is cybersecurity. It's been what I've been doing for most of my career. I would argue with any security professional when that doctor's getting frustrated and needs to get DICOM images to another hospital and decides to WhatsApp it that could save a life, that is more important for me than transferring that data securely. So we need to put mechanisms to allow both in place to happen. Thank you ever so much for your time. I hope you found this session valuable. I've said I'd leave 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A session, but I've answered a couple of questions along the way. So if anyone does have any questions, I'd value them now.
That's great, Jamie. I think, like you said, you covered a couple of the questions off as you went along. And that was mainly around NHS Mail, how it integrates, and I guess not just using a protect element, but across a whole social care network. Everyone is going to have some sort of access to egress, whether that be kind of care homes, private healthcare, NHS trusts, GP practices. They're all going to be using egress in one form or another. So I think you did pretty good in covering that one off. Office 365 is a challenge that we see organizations believe, they believe by moving to 365 and M365 that they're going to be okay. I think it's quite clear that there's going to be some gaps, and if you remember one of the slides that I showed up, it's about looking at that existing technology, because 365 will be fit for purpose, but it's looking at that additional layered security. And with egress, we're looking to make that as fundamental as possible, embracing it, so providing employees with the tools and the necessary knowledge to make that happen. Jamie, do you want to speak a little bit around deployment? I know this is one of the biggest challenges that we face here at CSEM, is organizations struggling for time and resource around projects. There's constantly different things that they need to keep an eye on. So do you want to touch a little bit on that process?
Yeah, of course. I mean, projects fail if projects drag on too long. I'm a great believer in that. And actually, the way in which we've architected all of our technology is to try and be as simple as possible when it comes to deployment. If we look at the inbound risks, fundamentally speaking, it's a couple of PowerShell scripts to configure some connectors to your Microsoft tenancy, and away we go. The software, starts learning, starts doing its analysis, and then we turn on the banners after about a week. We deployed to 13,500 users 2 days ago in 40 minutes. It's pretty good going. And
That's
obviously
impressive.
there's awareness that needs to, go around that. We need to, communicate to our users that there is going to be a red banner, which is legitimate to say, we think this is a phish and they are allowed to click on it. But in terms of technological deployment, that global deployment as well, it wasn't just a UK deployment. We deployed to, Asia Pac, Europe, US, Canada, UK, across them 13,000 users in, minutes, which is phenomenal. On the outbound risks, because we want to engage with the users before they make a mistake, not at the perimeter level as stuff is flowing out of the organization. Fundamentally, anyone who's got access to a system sense tool or an Intune can deploy our software as an MSI file, configure as single sign-on, and we can deploy pretty much within a day. Our software learns, again, we do a historical analysis, and we then ultimately start providing value in 24 hours of deployment.
Okay, that's fantastic. I know, like I said, it's one of the most common challenges we have, particularly within trust and IT departments. They just simply don't have the resource available to do it. So I think it also aligns with our own messaging at CSTEM. It's about getting those ducks in line, understanding when you want projects completed by, and working backwards from there. So if you do have to meet some, like the accreditations, for example, or you have some deadlines in place, we will understand that. We'll work with you on that. So by understanding what the deployment process looks like, we then have to work with you to understand what that procurement process looks like. Do we need to do a POV? Who needs to sign off in terms of boards and execs? So it's all about working backwards and having your end goals in mind, essentially. Jamie, I wanted to touch on another point. In the event that an employee has sent an email to the incorrect recipient, so that may or may not have data, may not have confidential information as part of that, what confidence would this give that organization in addressing that? So would they be able to retract the email? Would they be able to monitor, log everything that's been associated to that email and the data as part of that?
Yes, I mentioned that every kind of every kind of email we create a risk score for, and not all data breaches are the same. Now, we can automate security based on the risk factors of that email, whether something is low risk, medium risk, or high risk, you may want to flat out block it. When sharing, if you're sharing data utilizing egress encryption, at any point you can view that audit events and see who's accessed that content and when they've accessed it. And with the click of a button, revoke access to that sensitive content. So ultimately, what that means for DPOs, information security kind of professionals, is anything that has gone to potentially the wrong person, even if egress has flagged it and we've allowed the user to send it anyway based on policy and profile, but it won't be containing sensitive information or patient identifiable information, because underpinned, we would highly recommend applying the appropriate level of protection to any PII in line with kind of the various compliance regulations that you mentioned a second ago.
Okay, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And at this point, I'd like to welcome any more questions on the chat. I'll give people a minute or two just to, if they've got any further thoughts or comments on today's webinar. I think from our perspective here at CSTEM, we've gone through the first stage in our process. You've had an overview of ourselves. You've had an overview of egress and an introduction to the technology. We will be following up over the coming days. We will be looking to book some meetings in place to get confirmation of the challenges and some of the pain points that you have and that you're experiencing. I know it's a pivotal time of the year for everyone, so we will look to put those in. And I would like to say thank you for everyone for joining. As I said, we will or have recorded this session, so we will be sending that out for you to share with your colleagues. And one final comment would be to follow us on LinkedIn and follow us. We're constantly posting content, sharing things, not just with Egress, but our other partners. So we'd welcome some followers there, and look forward to speaking and confirming some meetings over the coming days. Thank you all for joining.